I first started watching Frieren around the time when it started airing, and honestly, I didn't really like it that much at first, so I stopped watching it. However, as time passed, I noticed how many people were talking about it, and it even reached the #1 spot on my anime list by a lot. So recently, I decided to go back and catch up to the anime to see if maybe I was missing something, or maybe just to see if it got better. And I will say it, I was very underwhelmed, and it's not like I had super high expectations to begin with, but the anime to me was just very uninteresting from start to finish. So that's why I decided to make this review. I just want to talk about why I didn't really like this anime, and honestly, I'm kind of confused as to why it's so popular. I thought maybe I can even find out why other people like it so much. I'm gonna start out this review by talking about how I don't feel like this anime has its own distinct style. It honestly just kind of feels like every other fantasy or isekai anime ever, and I know this isn't an isekai, but it kind of fits under a lot of the stereotypes isekais are. The characters aren't really that unique or distinct. The OST is the most generic thing I've ever heard. Now, this anime is supposed to be an adventure, but it really doesn't feel like it. The characters are constantly moving between different places and meeting new people, sure, but the problem is that none of the areas feel distinct from one another, so every place they go is kind of just the same over and over again. It doesn't feel like each area has its own distinct personality or culture, and everything just kind of feels the same. There isn't one single character they meet along the way that wasn't forgettable. For this reason, it's not a very exciting adventure to the point where truly you feel like you're going through different stages of the anime and you feel like you're associating them with different areas. It feels kind of dull in terms of the actual physical environment. It's also supposed to be a fantasy, but the fantasy elements of this anime are so stereotypical. I mean, it feels like this anime just had a checklist of fantasy setting elements that it wanted to include. Even Konosuba was parodying literally everything in this anime back in 2016. And as far as the world building goes, I think this is one of the weakest parts of the anime. The actual locations they go to feel like they have little to no importance in the actual world we're in. They kind of just feel like random kingdoms and villages. But why are these kingdoms actually important in the world? We're never really told, so it kind of feels like these places just exist only to give the main characters a place to go, which kind of makes the anime feel more soulless. The actual world we're in is not dynamic at all. It feels like the characters in the anime are changing around the world. It doesn't feel like the world is changing around the characters. And it kind of makes watching them journey around feel pretty much meaningless, because it doesn't really matter where they go. The same things are gonna happen anyway, so it could be random kingdoms, villages, or just pretty much nowhere. It doesn't really matter. So it kind of feels like these places were thrown in just to make the world feel more important than it actually is. Also, the magic system didn't really get explored much when it comes to the way this society actually uses magic. It seems to be more of a weaponry tool than anything, but I want to know how it's incorporated in the actual world. Why don't farmers use it to make farming more efficient, for example? There is even a scene where Fern helps someone out who needed help with farming by using her magic to instantly do the job. The only thing we get like this is in episode 27 when we see a guy that runs a repair shop use magic to repair weapons. I feel like magic is a very advanced tool they could use for pretty much anything, so why is it not commonplace for pretty much everyone to use magic? I feel like in this type of world, we should have a far more advanced society than just basic kingdoms and villages at this point if we can use magic to pretty much do anything. Now, another thing that doesn't really make sense is the lack of elves in the anime. Now, I understand that they explain this, but I'm not really buying the explanation of how they don't feel the need to reproduce. Because then how are they even a large species to begin with? Clearly they had some way of mating before. Even if that is a problem, it doesn't explain the scarcity of elves still either, because we're only shown 3 throughout the entire anime. And the other part of it is that the Demon King apparently sent out a bunch of armies to go take out all these villages full of elves. And the reason he did this was because the elves posed the biggest threat to him. You would think that since elves are able to live for thousands of years, that more of them would have been powerful enough to survive some demons. Surely if Frieren could survive the demons when she was a kid, then there would be more elves who were able to survive at all. Are we meant to believe that there are only select few elves in the whole world over the past 1,000 years that have even attempted to master magic? The fact that elves are able to live over 10 times the lifespan of a human gives them such an overpowering advantage. So how did these elf villages even fall so easily anyways? I feel like even the weakest elves that they practiced hard enough would be able to get really good at magic, even way better than most humans. Were there no elves that would just journey around on their own? It's as if the writer expects us to believe that every elf that existed before lived in one of the villages that the demons attacked, and were not part of any other kingdoms or anything. If the demons were really that much stronger than the elves in the past, why didn't they just take out all of humanity? I mean, wasn't that their goal anyways? What was stopping the Demon King from just going and killing everyone in the kingdoms? I mean, at that point, they had already taken out their biggest enemy, which is all the elves. It seems like he was pretty much just AFK until Frieren showed up to kill him. If I had to pick a high point for this anime, I would definitely say the animation was absolutely beautiful at times. And even though I felt like it was kind of over the top a lot of the time, I feel like this is one of the strongest points in the anime regardless. But for me, it kind of takes more than just pretty colors and animation to get me to like the anime. One thing I really wish this anime did better was I wish it had more interesting background art. A lot of the background art felt kind of lame and it didn't really encapsulate me in the environment very well. A lot of the time when they were just walking around, I didn't really feel immersed. Maybe it's just because of how generic the anime feels. Like it feels like every other isekai ever when I'm looking at the background, and you can't really separate it from anything else. Despite all of my problems I had with this anime, if it felt more atmospherically alive, I genuinely think I would have appreciated it much more and maybe even been able to enjoy it myself. But that's not really the case for me. A lot of the time the background, it just kind of feels dull. Now that we're talking about atmosphere, another thing that didn't add to the atmosphere at all was the soundtrack. The OST is overly generic and boring, and it's not ambitious at all or even soulful. It just doesn't feel like its own OST. It honestly feels AI generated. I thought the directing was competent, but there was a lot of questionable scenes that didn't really make sense. Sometimes when they kill monsters, they kind of just dissolve randomly as if they were in a video game, which didn't really feel immersive at all. And there's also a lot of random explosions that are just there for no reason. Like a lot of the time, nothing would even be happening to cause an explosion, and it would happen anyway. There was genuinely times during this anime where I thought Torg from Borderlands was the person directing it.
I'm Torg, and I'm here to ask you one question, and one question only. Explosions!
The random explosions are just another reason to not take this anime seriously. I mean, I get it, it's like magic and stuff, but why does every magic anime have to have random explosions? I mean, again, Konosuba was already making fun of this nonsense. And not only that, these scenes had nothing to do with magic. It was just random explosions. Like literally all that happened was a bird picked up the carriage they were in. Why did an explosion happen? I don't understand.
You have two fathers, motherfucker. Your father and your father in tonight. Your father and your father tonight. Yeah, really, Mom? This is the problem, man.
Early on in this anime, I was already conditioned to know that explosions mean nothing because clearly in those scenes that we just watched, nothing happens to the characters even when a massive nuke goes off right on top of them. It just means absolutely nothing. And the problem with us being over-conditioned to think that explosions mean nothing in this anime is that whenever one actually needs to happen for the plot, it just means even less than it would have before. Another one of the main problems that I had with this anime was the comedy. It does a very poor job at mixing comedic elements with serious tones, and it just makes it hard to take seriously at times. They also use a lot of goofy sound effects that just feel very out of place, like they shouldn't even be taking place in the world. During this episode, Stark was bitten by a venomous snake and he was literally on the edge of dying, but the entire time, they were just treating it like a joke, as if his character wasn't already unserious enough. How am I supposed to take this anime seriously when even the people creating it aren't taking it seriously? This also happens during episode 1 when Frieren's friends were about to be executed by the king and they were just treating it very unseriously as if it didn't even matter. Like in the background, they're just wiggling around. I already knew based on this one scene alone what type of anime I was getting myself into early on, and that's part of the reason why I stopped watching it, because I already knew that it was just going to be filled with comedy scenes like this. But even the comedy in general just feels like it was written by a 13-year-old. But most of the jokes in this anime were honestly just cringe, and if they weren't cringe, it was just repeating the same joke over and over again, as if us seeing the priest being drunk again for the 50th time was going to be any funnier than the 49th time. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, just in case if one drunk priest wasn't enough, they introduced the second one midway through the anime, just in case if you weren't sick of the first one yet. But another thing they do for comedy is they make the characters make stupid faces like Frieren and Fern. It's really cringe a lot of the time, and Another thing that's supposed to be funny is Stark being praised as a hero and he was actually just a coward. I mean, how many times have you seen that before? Also, the comedy's really overbearing at times to the point where it's just straight up annoying. Every time we get a flashback with Frieren, there's always comedy happening. It's never something serious. It's genuinely just the characters acting like idiots. This drunk priest is drunk again for the 51st time. Himmel's acting like a complete idiot, and all the characters are acting like they're stereotypes as if you would expect them to act the other 20 times we saw the characters. I feel like if it wasn't so unserious all the time, I would actually be able to enjoy it somewhat. Now, as for the characters, most of them, if not all of them, constantly have no expression on their face. They just look like robots. They don't really feel like actual humans. They'll be in the middle of a fight and they're like about to die or something and they'll just still be expressionless. And it's really annoying because our main two characters that we follow the most are the ones that have the least expression, Fern and Frieren. The only time Fern and Frieren are not completely expressionless is whenever there's a comedy scene and they're making like a stupid face. And this isn't just in the visuals either, it's also in the dialogue. A lot of the time, especially during fights, the characters talk like robots. Also, it's not just Frieren and Fern, it's also pretty much everyone in the anime. There's like maybe 2 characters or 3 characters that actually display emotions. And even then it was hard to take seriously because of how stupid the character he was fighting was. I did not like Stark's character at all and honestly liked it more when he was out of the anime because he was just super annoying. Even though he was one of the few characters that actually displayed emotions, he displayed annoying emotions. Also, a lot of the characters don't even really have any motivations. And when they do, it doesn't feel like it's actually real motivations that makes them their own independent person. For example, the demons, they kind of just want to kill people, I guess. And it's just really dumb because it's not like gray morality. There's nothing like that in it. It's just like, oh yeah, I'm bad, I want to kill people. Now, there are some rare cases where it feels like people actually do have their own motivations. And one example I'll give is the second priest guy. He ends up splitting up from the group to go on his own journey to find his friend. And it's things like this that make the anime feel more alive sometimes, but it's very rare when things like this happen. Another moment that stuck out to me was in episode 8 whenever the one guy figured out what the demons were trying to do. I thought that was pretty cool. It was someone who was actually intelligent. And usually in anime, these type of characters are just like NPCs and they're pretty oblivious to everything that's going on. So it was actually cool that this guy felt like a real person with intelligence. As for the main cast though, there's not really anyone I like besides Frieren. But honestly, with Fern and Stark, both of these two characters feel very replaceable. I think Frieren is definitely the best out of the main cast because of the themes surrounding her character with nostalgia and stuff. But I think these two are easily replaceable with anybody. Now, as for some positives, like I guess it's not the worst thing ever. There's definitely far worse anime and you know, it wasn't horrendously bad, I guess. I also liked a lot of the sound design choices. Besides the actual soundtrack, I think a lot of the sound effects they used were actually really cool. And I'm obviously excluding any of the ones that were used for comedy purposes. I'm just talking about during the actual fights. A lot of the time when they were using magic, it sounded really nice and crystally, and I actually really enjoyed that.
魔力も技術もコントロールも
Now, besides that, I also really enjoyed the themes, especially early on. Frieren is really a story about nostalgia, not realizing how good what you have is until it's gone. It's also about over-obsessing with those memories and not being able to move on from the past. This is sort of what Frieren's character is all about to me. This is why she's constantly going back to her past memories and why we constantly get flashbacks. I think one of the things people really like about Frieren is it kind of feels like Frieren is the main character in her own life. She's kind of going through this journey, going with different groups of people, going through different friend groups, kind of like how we do in real life. We constantly are going through different stages of our life, journeying through different friend groups. It all kind of goes by really fast, sort of how it is for Frieren as well. And sometimes you might even go a long time without seeing these people, and whenever you get to see them again for the first time in a while, it doesn't really feel like it's been that long. But in reality, they're going to be totally different people than what you remember them for being. So to me, it's sort of about how our perception of time changes how we see the world as well as how we view others. But another thing I noticed is Frieren is constantly trying to figure out some way to incorporate something she learned or did with her old friend group into her new one. And this is why she constantly gets flashbacks and goes back to old magic she used to use or goes back to old restaurants, for example. And even in episode 1, it might not have seemed like she really cared that much about the people she was with, but deep down she definitely did. And that's kind of what it's about. But one thing I don't really like is that we only really got one episode of these people, and most of it was just comedy, nonsense, and we don't really get to see much of like what they actually did. So for Frieren, yeah, she feels strong nostalgia for her old group, but for us, we don't really get to feel any of that nostalgia she feels. It's kind of just about her character. It's not actually about what we feel. And you know, honestly, I think I would have liked this anime a little more if we got to feel that same nostalgia she felt. If this was like a long-running anime and, you know, we're on like episode 30 and she's like going back to her past memories with her old group, I think it would be a little bit more impactful if we got to feel that same nostalgia she felt. And honestly, I just don't think episode 1 did a good enough job at making us feel any type of nostalgia for this group. And we do get a lot of flashbacks pretty much every time. It's just some comedy nonsense happening and the characters are repeating the same stereotypes we already know them for. And the impact we're supposed to take away from this episode is just comedy and a bunch of slideshows of them fighting enemies and mimic chests. So yeah, I just don't really think episode 1 is that great. Besides that though, this anime gets very repetitive, and I think that's a huge problem because after like episode 7, I was just wondering, okay, is this going to progress or go anywhere? And it just kept repeating the same topics over and over again about the past and nostalgia, and it never really went anywhere. So, I mean, as much as I like the themes in this anime, I don't really think they really went anywhere or did anything interesting with them. Now, next up, I'm going to talk about the fights, and honestly, outside of the animation, the fights were some of the worst I've seen in anime. The magic system, especially early on, felt like a freedom tool for the writer to be able to do anything they wanted with it. Since magic is such an ambiguous thing, it's hard to really feel immersed during any of the fights. They don't really feel strategic, they kind of just feel more random, like they're shooting random explosions and shooting random things out, but I don't really know what's happening, and neither does anyone watching the anime. I was kind of just paying more attention to the animation, and it was like, oh yeah, it's like a cool black hole looking thing, and it's like, oh, explosion here, and then now they're putting up like a shield. The defensive magic was the only thing consistent in the anime. I mean, it's very instinctual. You can really understand how defensive magic works, but outside of the spells, the offensive magic just feels very random. But even if it didn't feel like that, the fights are still terrible. There will be times where someone should absolutely kill one of the characters and they just don't for no reason. There would even be times where it would happen multiple times in the same fight. Also, the dialogue is pretty terrible a lot of the time. Even excluding the cringe-inducing comedy and the robotic talking, there was still a lot of things that really bothered me with the dialogue. I'm here to assassinate you, Frieren, but before I do that, I'm going to talk to you for 2 minutes about random nonsense, and then right before I attempt to kill you, I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm trying to do so that you can stop it. Oh yes, we're trying to sneak into a place where we're not supposed to be, so let me just announce to everyone who might potentially be listening that it's too quiet in here. Is this character genuinely just supposed to be that stupid? This happens all the time in the anime, and it's just so infuriating. There are also a lot of contradictions in the things that people talk about. For example, during the mage exams, they were constantly saying about how they didn't want any mages with promising futures to die here, but yet they killed people within the first exam. And then they said it was to weed out the weak, which didn't make any sense because they contradicted that in the next exam, how they said they didn't want anybody to die. And it doesn't even make any sense. If you die, that doesn't inherently make you weak. What if somebody just got extremely unlucky and died to one of the giant birds while they were asleep or something? Even if they didn't contradict themselves in the dialogue, it also contradicts the entire point of the anime. Isn't the whole reason that people are not allowed to go up north is because they don't want people to die? So why would these people make the only one way to go up north involve people dying every time they take the exam? Is there no kind of magic that can just simulate people dying? For example, let's say someone was on the edge of dying, maybe the big birds would just stop attacking randomly because they knew they were about to die. And if someone were about to die in this scenario, why wouldn't they just make that the same as failing? There was also this thing about how suppressing your mana is a cowardly thing that is heavily frowned upon by everybody. But isn't concealing your mana pretty much the same concept? Why is concealing mana not also seen as cowardly? Even the exams themselves are also very lame. There was barely any use of tactics or anything, and they were really unentertaining. There was some stuff that was sort of tactical in the first game, I guess, but it all kind of felt really stupid. If you knew the spell to catch birds, you were at such a huge advantage. And in the second exam, I didn't understand why they all didn't just go together in the dungeon. There was absolutely no reason for everyone to not group up. It's not even a competition at this point like it was in the first game. In this game, literally everyone can win if they work together. So everyone grouping up together could have possibly done nothing but benefit everyone. But for some reason, nobody trusts each other, I guess. And I mean, that doesn't even really make any sense because there's no reason not to. But at least the exams arc was somewhat entertaining, I guess, and at least progressed the plot some. And we also got introduced to a lot of new characters, which I actually liked as well. But for 8 episodes right before the exams arc, I was just insanely bored throughout each episode. Nothing was happening to progress the plot in any meaningful way. This anime is also full of plot conveniences. I've already listed off a few as well, like the main characters not getting killed when they should. But to list off more... Oh no, I lost my jewelry. That's very important to me. If only the one person nearby just so happens to also know a spell that can find lost jewelry specifically. Also, during the first exam, how did Fern's group even catch the bird? We were told that Fern uses the same spell that Frieren did, but why did Frieren decide to teach Fern such a useless spell? And even if she just did it for fun a long time ago, why would Fern remember such a useless spell? Did they know that they were going into a bird catching competition beforehand or something? How are you even supposed to catch these birds fairly unless you have this spell? Is one of the requirements for being a tier 1 mage being able to use a bird catching spell? During this scene where Fern surprise attacks the demons, the reason she was able to successfully pull this off is because she was concealing her mana. Only whenever she started flying did they realize she was there. But literally 5 minutes ago, she was also flying right before she came here, so did they not sense her then as well? I was going to go over a lot more plot conveniences, but honestly, I think you guys get my point already, so I'm just going to stop wasting time. So in conclusion, throughout most of this anime, I was really bored, and there wasn't really that much I even liked about it to begin with. There's a few positives, I guess, and like it's not the worst anime ever. I mean, there's definitely far worse anime. But I just couldn't get the idea that it was just really mid out of my head throughout my entire time watching this. And overall, I was not too impressed with this anime. I'm giving this one a decent 4. Yep, that's what I'm giving it. And honestly, that is the most positive rating I could possibly give it. But also, I am not too excited for Season 2. The only reason I would be is because of how popular Season 1 has been so far. So I guess I'll watch Season 2 if it comes out. If it continues being as popular as Season 1 was, then yeah, sure, I'll watch it, I guess. But if Frieren dies out, you'll probably never see me watching Season 2. Also, for anybody who likes Frieren, I definitely have a recommendation for you, and I'll tell you to go watch Mushishi, because a lot of people that like Frieren seem to like it for its serene environment, which I didn't really feel in this anime, but an anime I definitely felt that in is Mushishi. Mushishi captures that serene atmosphere way better than Frieren does. It has its own distinct style, soundtrack, everything is just great about it, really. And I think it's probably the most peaceful and serene anime I've ever seen, so yeah, go check it out if you haven't already. But anyways, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed Frieren, let me know why in the comments, and if you didn't like Frieren, also let me know why in the comments. So yeah, that's all I have for this review, and I'm working on a bunch of other reviews right now that hopefully I'll be able to upload really soon. So definitely stay tuned for those, and I'm also planning to upload a lot of reviews on this channel in general. So subscribe if you'd like to see more, because hopefully this can go far.
全て忘れてもプレインだけで祈りのようになぜだとか僕の気持ち注ぐてポケットのすべてが割れるメッセージテレレレレトレオ